Welcome to the Adoption Curve, the show where we explore how leading organizations are transforming their approach to turn technology adoption into a strategic advantage. In each episode, we'll sit down with a learning and enablement practitioner to get their inside story on how they're helping their organizations adopt and maximize their technology investments. Let's dive into today's episode. Sam, welcome to the show.
Amazing. Thanks, Sean, for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, been looking forward to this conversation ever since we met in person at the Pulse event. It was such a great conversation. I wanted to record this and really try to bring some of your great ideas to light because I really reference a lot of those topics from the first discussion, and I feel like a lot of this is my notepad, so I want to make it a little bit more public for people. So.
Love that.
I appreciate you being my sounding board in the short term here the past couple of months. Other than that, I'd love to kick it off with just a bit of an intro. Give us a little bit of context in terms of who you are, how you got here, a little bit of your early journey.
Sure. Yeah. So again, very grateful to you for having me on the show. My name is Samantha Murray. I currently run my own business. So at the moment, I am a go-to-market and customer experience strategist and advisor to largely startups, but also to small businesses and, mid-market B2B SaaS organizations that are looking to figure out how to use experience as a growth lever that they can use to scale their business. Before that, I have dabbled in everything from marketing to customer success to go-to-market strategy to partnerships. And so I've sort of at Shopify, when I was there, we called it the jungle gym. And so very much that's been the case for the majority of my career. I've bounced around in a lot of different roles. And I think that has lended itself very well to, the consultancy that I now run.
I love that. Yeah, I really think it's interesting that you've been able to pull some of the go-to-market from all perspectives there. Tell us a little bit about the kind of connective tissue between these roles. And I think you were on the kind of post-sale side, then there was a bit of a go-to-market side. So how is that evolution kind of framed where you are now?
For sure. Yeah. So I started my career early on actually in marketing. So I was a brand strategist and account manager in a brand marketing agency here where I live in Ottawa. And then I made the jump into customer success at Shopify. That was my first SaaS organization that I joined. This was back in like 2015, late 2015 is when I joined them. They had just IPO'd. And they were in the process of launching Shopify Plus, which is their enterprise version of Shopify. And so I joined their, at the time, account management team, which eventually became customer success. But in those early days, they were, moving folks from support roles into these account management positions and needed someone to come in, I think, it wasn't just me, it was a few people that were targeted to be brought on to sort of just scale the customer success function and lay the foundations for scale. And so I did that for a few years and it was amazing. It was an amazing opportunity for me to take everything that I'd done as an account manager and as a marketer and to be able to use my expertise to be able to coach and grow these organizations that were joining Shopify and that were really in those early days of Shopify Plus. It wasn't the mega organizations that they serve now. It was like, mom and pop shops that had grown to a certain level and they were starting to bring on some of those bigger brands. And it was helping them by teaching them all of this stuff that I knew about. So how do you market yourself? How do you use social media to grow? How do you set up your products in a way that's going to be conducive to a positive user experience? And so I did that for a few years, grew the team, and eventually the conversations that I was having were becoming repetitive. And I started to notice there was a lot of the same questions happening, the same support tickets coming in, the same challenges. And so I turned that into a webinar program. We launched our first version of Shopify Plus Academy around, I want to say it was 2017. And then eventually I shifted back onto the marketing side of Shopify and joined the customer education team at that point. Worked with a product team to launch our own in-house learning platform. I was part of that team. We were designing in-product experiments using education as a lever to drive product-led growth at the time. My journey eventually evolved into leading the global customer education team there at Shopify across all of our different merchant audiences, which was just absolutely incredible. Again, it was my career has always been about balancing marketing with customer success, right? Like I, for the longest time, called myself, a customer focused marketer or a marketing focused customer educator, right? Like I've always sort of sat in the middle between these two functions and used that to my advantage to differentiate myself against some of the other folks that play in this space, because I think you do require a little bit of both of those two things. Fast forward a little bit, I joined a company called Docebo. They're a leading learning platform in the market, led go-to-market strategy there, eventually took on a bunch of other functions, I think just as a nature of the experience that I brought to the table. And yeah, it's just been, again, it's like blending all of these random bits and pieces that I've picked up over the course of my career so that I can be of service, so that I can be of service to the customers, so that I can be of service to the teams that I've led, and just use the expertise that I've developed across all of these different things to grow people, to grow companies. That's it.
I've really appreciated your perspective on the sort of like proximity to customer that you've really seemed to weave into a lot of our discussions that we've had. And this concept of like education and marketing are still this pursuit and service of the end customer, right? They might be in a different position in the funnel or in their experience, but it's not a function of your business. It's more a function of like with their maturity, the customer themselves, what's going on there. Just backing up a little bit to the Shopify example, I'd love to kind of unpack that, because most folks obviously are not experiencing the hyper growth that organization has had, but they may be a little bit earlier in that stage of like, okay, they're throwing some CSMs and some account managers with their customers, and they're working on adoption and trying to maybe drive home. It doesn't have to be technology. It could be even their own services or their own initiatives or projects, whatever they have going on. And they're doing a little bit of that, like coaching, moonlighting as a consultant and coach, because there's not really a program yet. There's not an academy yet. There's not these sort of functions. So I'd love any advice or thoughts you have around those early days for those folks that are in that position, who are like scrappily trying to make templates and things together to serve their customer while also making sure they hit their regular metrics. Because I imagine that happened very quickly for your organization then. I'd love to know what that would, what your advice would be for folks that are maybe gradually trying to figure out that with less resources.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think like you already mentioned some of that even in your question, right? Like the templates, the playbooks, making sure that you're setting yourselves up with a foundation for eventual scale, and making sure that you're thinking about those things from day one. So as a CSM and as a collective within our customer success organization in those early days of Shopify, we met as a team quite regularly to share best practices, to talk very often about the questions that were coming up from merchants, the challenges that they were facing. And inevitably, when you're doing that, it's essentially a form of internal enablement, but it was really informal back in those days. And it allowed us to be very fast acting in developing playbooks and templates and resources that we knew would support our merchant base, because we were constantly having conversations about the main topics that were coming up. Like even in the absence of data and sophisticated architectures and all these things that are going to give you voice of customer insights, you can just get together as a team on a weekly basis and talk about the conversations that you're having with your customers, and let that form really scrappy, iterative, templates and resources that you then push out to your customers, and then see if that works. Like have the follow-up conversation after as a team, and talk about whether the resource that you delivered, did it work? Did it do the thing? Did it lend itself to the action and the outcome that we were trying to drive together as a team? Just like forming those little iterative feedback loops, even at a microscopic scale, like starting there is a great place to begin to lay the foundations for more formal voice of customer programs moving forward as you scale.
Yeah. You mentioned something when we were chatting before we hit record here about, this adoption being a two-way street as well, right? Especially for a scaling org, you've got the customer who's scaling in their adoption of your product or service or whatever that looks like. You also have your own organization who's figuring out what a good service to the customer looks like. Yeah, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that, and like the framework, because it sounds like you had some ideas on stepping back and looking at it a little more holistically.
Yeah, I just find it so interesting because when you break it down, like if I'm a customer education professional, and I'm thinking about feature adoption amongst my customer base, I've got a customer account that has 25 users, and I'm focused on driving feature adoption across those 25 users. Well, those users are employees inside of an organization of their own, They're trying to use the tool that I'm offering them to accomplish a job. And most likely their manager also cares about their adoption of that tool so that they can, unblock them in being able to do their job and increase performance. Most likely there's folks within the IT department at that organization that also care about adoption of the product because they've paid for it and they want to make sure that there's a positive ROI on whatever tools that they're adopting within that organization. But it's like we forget that as customer education professionals, right? We're over here just trying to put out content. We're trying to, use different levers to try to drive adoption of that person. But we forget that on the other end of that, that's a person that's just trying to do their job. They're an employee. They've got stuff to do. And so for me, it's always been like that. That's been a really good mental model to keep in mind when I am designing programs, because my job as whether it's customer education professional, whether it's been in a go-to-market or marketing capacity, whether it's been embedded within a product team, my job is to remove friction such that I've made their job easier. And therefore, then they're naturally going to adopt the things that I'm putting in front of them. That's my job. That's our collective job. And when we think about it that way, it just makes it a little bit easier to think about the levers to pull and the content to produce, the resources to put in front of them, the experiences to create, because inherently, again, our job is to remove friction. It's not to add stuff. It's to remove as much friction as humanly possible so that they can do their job.
I could not agree more. The proximity piece, that's really what I want to double click on. How you think about empowering folks to get closer to customer, because it seems like there's this invisible wall that you're just thinking about yourself and your own metrics and your own pressure. And am I going to get fired tomorrow? And all the things that you have going on that you forget that it's in service of something, or it might be an internal team. If you're an L&D, it could be a customer, it could be, prospect, whatever that happens to be. And we forget that other person, like you said, has a job to do and they have their own set of initiatives and things that they're working on. So how do we think about snapping ourselves out of it a little bit more to get a little closer to the reality, the jobs to be done of that end audience that we might be serving?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, one of the things that I teach as part of, so I didn't really mention this in the beginning, but I also run a business called People Experience as a Product. Really an operating model that we've developed based around product management principles and best practices. And one of the things that we teach is empathy mapping. Get with the user that you're serving. So whether you are an L&D'er creating programs for employees, whether you are in sales enablement and you're servicing sellers, you're in customer education, doesn't matter who the audience is. Deeply understanding your users, interviewing them, talking to them, mapping out their journey through service design, really trying to get into the weeds and understanding what it is that they're trying to accomplish. What are their pains? What are their desires and needs? What are they looking to accomplish in their day-to-day? Understanding that so deeply that you can then start to notice patterns across those things, pains and needs and desires. And that's what forms your strategy in terms of the things that you want to develop to remove friction and improve the experience. You need to really develop empathy for your users, and that requires you to be talking to them regularly, conducting user interviews. Again, service design and blueprinting and customer journey mapping, all of these are tools in the toolkit that help us actually understand the people that we are serving. And it's so critical as a foundation for any kind of role where you're creating, whether it's products, whether it's experiences, it doesn't really matter what it is that you're offering. It's our duty to understand the users and to get as close as possible to the people that you serve so that you understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Well said. Any talk track or advice for the folks that have to try to explain this to leadership who's going, yeah, that sounds great. I want you to serve customers, but I need you to scale as fast as humanly possible as well. Any thoughts that come to mind there?
So one of the things that I talk about really often is getting out of the mindset of outputs and getting into the mindset of outcomes, right? And that's the language of a C-level executive. And I think that's where a lot of folks end up getting blocked in their own career journeys in these spaces that we operate in, because we forget to speak the language of the business. Nobody cares. No offense, nobody cares about your onboarding program, right? Like nobody cares about your performance management program. No one cares. What they care about is outcomes. What they care about is it helping me get closer to business objectives? And so when you can reframe the programs that you're running from outputs and projects and initiatives into outcomes that I'm driving, lagging indicators that lead into a North Star metric that drive actual tangible business performance for the entire organization, like that's when you're able to actually have a seat at the table and have real conversations about what it is that you're doing. So I think like first and foremost, making sure that you actually understand your business objectives. Like priority number one for you as an individual, whether you're an individual contributor or a leader, understanding the priorities for your organization at any given time and being able to map down to your initiative and understanding how am I going to measure success of this thing? So I'm launching an onboarding program. Again, who cares about your onboarding program? What is it doing? What am I unblocking? Am I trying to drive time to value? Am I trying to increase productivity in the first 14 days? Am I trying to what am I actually trying to accomplish, and how am I going to measure success? How am I going to measure success with leading indicators first and foremost that are going to give me that signal in terms of whether or not I'm headed in the general right direction, to eventually measure a lagging indicator of business outcome that ties into something that my executives care about. I think that's the main advice that I always give to people, because that's what's going to get you the buy-in to continue growing the programs and increasing your impact at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like empathy, right? It's like, just in this case, the empathy is for the folks up the food chain that you have to deliver that information for.
Exactly. And that's the beautiful balance that I think we all need to strive in this space, is like, I understand my users so deeply that I can service them in the best way possible by removing their pains, increasing the things that they desire such that they have a positive experience. And by doing that, I am inherently going to drive the business outcome that my CFO, my CEO cares about. And they're not mutually exclusive. I think a lot of times people think, well, if I only focus on the business, I'm doing a disservice to my people. And it's like, no, it's the other way around. By servicing your people and staying aligned to the North Star metric that your business cares about, you are naturally going to connect the dots and help your C-levels understand why there's such an importance being placed on these things that you're doing, these initiatives that you're running, and vice versa. Like for the people to understand that it makes sense that we're driving towards this business outcome because everyone wins.
We talk about this a lot in the sales side of things, of playing the opponent, not the cards, right? It's the concept of like at every stage, especially in the sales side, you are making a pitch, you're selling something, we're trying to get buy-in, and that may be a different audience at each stage. So maybe when you're getting approval for resources, where those things are, you're shifting that talk track and this narrative into the sale to the executives for what they care about. And then when you're customer facing or your internal facing, whoever your stakeholders are or the people you're serving, that is going to be a different perspective, right? It's skewed for the value that they care about. And like, especially with AI now, it's very easy to scrappily at least wrap your head around some of this business acumen. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have like incredible, financial literacy of understanding a P&L down to the, every line item. But we do this internally often where we have little GPTs set up for different personas, like where we're going in. We're just feeding in information. Like, I'm heading into this call. I don't really know that much about them, but here's this information. Here's their persona. Here's the business. And just like do some research out there and like give me a little bit about if I'm them, what do I care about? Like, what am I going to get hired, fired, promoted for? What am I probably being measured on or worried about? Like, those are the good first steps for any of those stakeholders you're meeting with. So you're starting to frame yourself through that empathetic lens of like, okay, let me think about other person first. And if I get like, it seems like I'm on their side, all of a sudden some things doors become unlocked, a little simpler.
That's such an excellent use of AI in the context of persona mapping and persona understanding and development. So in this program that we run, we have a guest speaker, Megan Trotter, who is user experience designer turned people experience designer. And she talks about this in our program, about how she uses ChatGPT and other AI tools to really get into the weeds of understanding the specific users that she's trying to serve with a particular initiative, and using GPT as that first experiment of understanding before you even go off and conduct user interviews and user research. It's like, can I just use ChatGPT's deep research functionality to give it some prompts around, this is at a high level what I know about this person, the audience that I'm trying to serve. And I want you to go off and find me all of the possible pain points that they might be experiencing in their day-to-day. Like, what are the common jobs to be done that they're trying to accomplish? What do they need? What are those friction points? Like, what are some of the blockers that tend to get in the way of their ability to achieve a certain outcome, right? Like, do that research first. And that's not to say that, again, this is not a replacement for user interviews and user research. It's so important to actually talk to your customers and the people that you serve, and do it in a way that is conducive to extracting insights. I think when we do sometimes interviews, we tend to put words in the mouths of the people that we're serving because we want to, validate a certain direction that we want to head in. And that is not the right way to do it at all. But to be able to use some of that initial research through an AI to then inform it's almost like the first experiment. Experiment number 1, try this with AI. And then experiment number 2, validate some of what you heard through AI with actual people that you are serving. It's such a brilliant way of using AI. Such a good use case for it.
And by the way, it's okay if you're 50% right. If you are at least taking a stab at this, 100%. You are 100% further off than the guy who shows up at the call and just goes, so what do you do? Just no preparation, proactivity at all, right? So people get all bent out of shape that there's hallucinations and things are slightly off. It's like, if you just are getting slightly informed, it's a huge step in the right direction. It's not like this information is being just sent off into a report or something. It's just used for conversational fodder to get things going, right? To show we're caring, we're doing another lift. The one other tip I would just share is, we have gotten a tremendous amount of value out of job descriptions, publicly facing job descriptions for all different things, right? Internally, if you are not getting a great feel for what an initiative is, look internally at your organization. What are they hiring for? They will tell you with their text exactly where they're putting their money. We want this type of person for this much money to accomplish these set of outcomes and oversee these things. Same thing if you're serving this from a customer standpoint. Okay, I see my customers hiring for these specific roles in this department for this type of thing. That is telling you what leadership said, yep, here's budget to go solve those problems. It's like a magnifying glass into these organizations. Just another one that we found a lot of value in, of just a public billboard, basically.
Yeah. It's building the muscle of curiosity. We call part of the job of a people experience designer or even a customer educator. Again, it doesn't really matter who you serve. It's playing detective. You gotta get real curious about the actual underlying problems, and not always take stuff at face value either, right? There's part of it is uncovering the deeper problems that are underlying the problems that you think are the thing that are blocking a certain action. Oftentimes there's 3 levels removed. And when you actually start to pull the thread of what's actually going on, it's like, you thought, you want to launch an onboarding program because you're seeing drop off within a certain amount of days. And actually, the underlying thing is they couldn't even activate in the first day because something was missing, right? And it's like, you cannot make assumptions. You really have to learn to go super, super deep with this stuff and play detective.
Yeah, and this is where the data and the blend of data and anecdotes are going to be really helpful. So, keeping on the thread of this experience as a service, this concept. So we talked about the sort of empathy mapping piece. We talked about kind of conceptually there. Walk us through, because I know you have a bit more of an agile methodology that you roll into that. Tell us a little bit more about how you think about that and some of that methodology.
Yeah, for sure. So at a high level, there's sort of 4 different stages, I guess, and this aligns to the modules that we teach in our program. Number 1 is understanding the strategy of a business. So like I was talking about earlier, making sure that you have clarity in terms of the business strategy. Do you understand your business fundamentally, right? Sometimes you're so far removed and you think that you're so far removed from a leadership role, from the C-level table, that you're you don't even understand what's happening. Like, what do you sell? How do you make money? Like, having enough context and understanding on the business that you operate in and how revenue is generated, understanding the strategy, understanding North Star metrics, understanding the things that your C-level executives care about, like developing that muscle first and foremost is kind of like the first part of it. Okay. And making sure that you can clearly associate things that you are working on your team back to uh, those strategies, those North Star metrics, the desired business objectives that your C-level executives care about. And then being able to develop a strategy for your team that aligns to those things. So like backwards designing from your business strategy down to your own team strategy is number one. The second piece of it is uncovering the actual problem. So that looks like user experience research, so empathy mapping, customer journey mapping, service design blueprinting, understanding the challenges of the users and trying to uncover how you might be able to solve some of those challenges. The third piece is then now that you have this deep understanding and you sort of have a lay of the land in terms of the challenges of your users, the things that are blocking them from adopting the product or from using the experience that you've created for them, it's all about prioritization. So being able to design solution trees and looking at a whole bunch of different solutions, not jumping to conclusions or assumptions about what's going to work because of past experience. So, oh, well, we know that people are dropping off within 14 days. Let's improve our onboarding program. No. What are all of the possible ways that we can solve this problem that we've uncovered? There could be 14 different solutions, right? And so assumption testing, prioritizing based on urgency and value that you expect to be delivered across a whole bunch of different solutions so that you can pick the one that is going to ultimately drive the result in the shortest amount of time possible. And then using things like pilots and prototypes to learn really quickly and reduce the inherent risk that's involved in launching a large scale project so that by the time you end up creating the thing that you want to create, you are so sure that this thing is going to work. You've validated it, you've tested it, you've co-created alongside your users, you've brought them along for the journey. And so then of course they're going to adopt the thing because they were part of it. They feel like they were part of it along the entire journey. That's really the breakdown of it at its core. And then of course there's this whole other piece around like continuing to measure efficacy, continuous improvement, evaluating, refining, evolving. There's like a long tail, I guess, like evolution that needs to also unfold because it's not just launch the thing and forget it. It's I'm going to continue speaking to my users, my customers. Are they still seeing value in this thing? What do I need to change? How do I need to adapt this to ensure that it's continuing to drive the expected impact and remove the friction so that they can adopt whatever it is that we're trying to put in front of them?
I love that framework. That's really helpful to visualize in that way. Selfishly, just thinking about our own business as a small bootstrap startup, when we've narrowed down all the possible assumptions of what we think could be a solution, do you typically think about running these things in tandem for those pilots? Do you think about running them sequentially? Like, let's try one, see how it goes, collect data. How do you think about that?
Yeah. It depends on the business and the resourcing, I think. So for sometimes it's possible to break things down into such tiny little micro solutions that it's possible to run multiple pilots at once because they're inexpensive, they're easy to stand up, right? So it really, like what we teach and what I try to instill in the clients that I work with is can you break down these different solution options to such a tiny little test with your user base that you can validate without risk? And then it allows you to run multiple things at once at the same time so that you can learn from a whole bunch of different things and sort of pick the solution that's driving the most impact or that's like driving the most value in the shortest amount of time possible. But sometimes that's not possible. It depends on the thing that you're trying to achieve, or the problem that you're trying to solve. It depends a lot on resources as well, size of the team. So there isn't really a one size fits all way of doing this. It really depends entirely on the needs that you have and being able to adapt and evolve it in real time based on your exact organization.
Are you saying that there's no magic bullet? for me?
There is
Is
no
that the
magic
takeaway
bullet.
that I got here?
If there was, we wouldn't be here, Sean. We wouldn't be here,
Yeah.
you and I.
Yeah, we talk about these things all the time. Every day, it's a matter of looking at these small micro experiments that we're trying to run, figuring out minimally viable set of data that we can pull off of this, and then also how to ruthlessly sort of prioritize those things, because you simply do not know what's going to work, right?
That's
Like
right.
you have them as hypotheses, and this is challenging because people, attach their ego, or it's like they put their flag in the ground. Like, I really think this is the thing. And you 100% believe that they believe that, right? And that might be the case. There's a lot of opinions and those things bouncing around that in a small team. And so this is something we deal with very often, is trying to figure out how to even prioritize which experiments we're going to run in which order, and
Right.
trying to make sure we have the data as quick as possible, because it's amazing how much the anecdotes can tell the story that the person's looking to pull, as you described before.
Yeah. This is why I'm such a fan of using the cost of delay framework for prioritization, because it removes any opportunity for confirmation bias to come in and make its way into our brains, right? Like if we are attached to a solution and we inherently think that this solution is the right one, we are always going to be at risk of bias in the way in which we even design our experiments. And so by using proven frameworks from the product world, it's like you're removing any possibility of bias, you're removing any possibility of influence, and you're really just following a very like laid out framework to help you do this in a way that aligns different people and different. And also when you're running this, by the way, like if you're doing this with a team of people, everyone's going to have different opinions. Everyone's going to have their own biases. By using a framework like cost of delay, you're removing all of that. And it's just, it's entirely data. It's like, we don't need to argue over this. We're just looking at data. We're just looking at this from completely objectively based on the data that we have available to us at this moment in time. And as soon as we have new data, then we're going to do this process again. And we're going to just keep doing that with every new bit of data that we acquire until we solve the problems. That's it. It's not that complicated when you break it down this way and you use the frameworks that are out there and available.
I'm not familiar with the cost of delay. That's a new one for me. So it sounds like the concept of trying to get data in that the quickest time possible, the general idea, and you're waving that into something like an agile framework to have project chunked out in small kind of consumable parts. That's the general thesis.
Yeah, so you lay it out in so we have a framework. I was just trying to pull it up, but I'm not going to be able to do that fast enough. But you kind of have a framework that is based on like urgency of the thing that you're trying to accomplish and anticipated value of the thing, of the initiative that you want to run. And so again, completely objectively, you would evaluate a whole bunch of different solution options based on urgency, meaning like, if we don't do this thing, what happens? By not doing this particular solution option, what actually happens? And then the inherent value of that thing, you also measure that or plot that out in this little like kind of 2x2 framework. And what you end up with is like, you're going to see very quickly that there are some things that are very costly for you not to do, that are going to cost the company in terms of risk, in terms of lost revenue, in terms of productivity and efficiency of teams, et cetera. And then there are, and at the same time, things that will inherently bring a lot of value, deliver a lot of impact and value to the business. And so those are naturally the things that you're going to want to prioritize.
That's a great summary. Yeah, it's really helpful to see. Awesome. Okay, so we'll link to some of these things here too, and I highly recommend folks check out some of Sam's work here on the experience side. I think that the program you described sounds like a great exercise in educating people for being armed with how to go about that. So it's really powerful. As we think about the data side, specifically, I know you've talked a lot about like next actions, next sets of friction in that process, whether it's an internal initiative or it's a customer experience. What else can you tell us about that piece in terms of when we're IDing those friction points, we're trying to attach data to that, just trying to arm people with the right resources for how to feel like they're going in as a project manager with like a plan.
Customer journey mapping and service design blueprinting is the answer. This is something that I was really fortunate to learn from my co-founder, Chris, on PX as a product. We actually worked together at Docebo, and he's the one that brought some of these models and frameworks to me in our work together. So he led the product team, I led go-to-market. So we were each other's counterparts on each side of the business, commercial and product. And we actually conducted a lot of these customer journey mapping exercises to better understand the challenges that our own customers were facing. And in addition, when we thought about the product offering at Docebo being a learning platform, our customers used the platform to educate, whether it was employees or customers themselves. And so using that as a tool to understand the ways in which they wanted to serve their own customers through all of this. It's a bit meta. I always, when I joined that organization, I thought it was so funny because I never really knew, like having been in customer education a long time and then suddenly writing, marketing, and creating resources for people that were like me, but then also doing that job. It's very, very meta. But customer journey mapping is such a powerful tool to have in the toolkit when it comes to identifying friction and identifying the things that are preventing people from taking the action that you want them to take. Because you're not just mapping the customer journey as the customer experiences it, but you're also in service design mapping all of the underlying systems, processes, technologies, operating models, teams, people, handoffs, like everything that happens behind the scenes, kind of like, if you consider an iceberg, the customer experience is, the tip of the iceberg. And then you have all of this other stuff happening in the background. And more often than not, that's where a lot of the problems actually stem from. So if you're doing customer journey mapping and you're only looking at the friction of the customer, the friction that they experience on the other end, man, you're missing like so much opportunity to actually fix what's going on the inside. And so by doing this exercise and by following this service design blueprint methodology, you will uncover usually issues with human interactions, with different handoffs that happen from, account AE to, the person that's responsible for signing the contract to maybe the, implementation manager to the CSM and then you also have marketing layered on and you have customer education that's trying to send people stuff. And you have product nudges and like that's where it gets really messy. And doing the service design allows you to actually see all of the stuff that we throw at our customers and all of the ways in which they experience us on the outside is actually us shipping the org chart and not fixing our internal processes. And so it's such an important tool to have and to conduct these exercises periodically. Usually with my clients, I recommend they do it twice a year is kind of the ideal because things change really quickly, especially in scaling organizations that are growing really quickly. Things change really fast. In cases where you have team members joining and new teams cropping up all over the place, you end up in these scenarios where like everyone's just trying to help. They're all trying to do right by the customer. They all want to solve the problems. And then again, you end up in these scenarios where when you map it all out, you realize that there's just a lot of friction happening internally inside the organization that's causing the friction on the customer side. And then you can start to actually address it and uncover using the prioritization framework. Where do we want to start? What problems do we want to solve? How is this connected to the business outcomes that we're trying to drive? And then pick a few experiments every quarter to run and see what happens.
I like that this is making it a bit more concrete and black and white. I know internally and certainly other orgs that I've been a part of, one of the challenges I think we have is similar to that siloed experience of not having empathy for other departments. You also are a specialist by and large when you're in a role, even in a startup. You have a set of skills that you were hired to go and do. And whatever lane or department you're in, there's a bias that you assume that medium is the solution, right? So now you've done this journey mapping, you've done solution identification, and then it's like, well, the product guy goes, well, we got to build a thing, and I got to go make a widget. And then the sales gal says, oh, well, actually, no, that's like a story. I need to really work and have a better conversation. And the marketing person goes, no, it needs to be this asset. There needs to be this event. And every one of them is like, here's the new like spear that we need to go attack with, right? And that's where I think what you're saying is if we break this down into smaller parts, we can test out some of those things. This is something we really struggle with because we're all aware that these problems are there, but similar to your part of like shipping the org chart of all of us attacking in our own lane instead of like a consolidated front where we have like actual unity. Yeah.
This is why I'm such a strong advocate of doing this work at the executive level. It's a team sport. It has to be. This type of work is foundational to the success of the organization because not only are we talking about customer experience front facing, the customer, the experience that we deliver to the customers, but we're talking about this all stemming from the experience that the employees have in their ability to do their job, right? It's all connected. And so being able to do this exercise with an executive team, with all of the various teams across the organization, from marketing to product to customer success, sales, all having a seat at the table and doing this exercise together, end to end customer journey, and being able to select and prioritize the things that together they feel are going to make the most impact on driving the expected business outcome. And having the executives, the CEO kind of say like, yes, like all together, you're going to go do this thing and you're going to solve these problems together. Man, like what a gift for organizations when they see it that way, because you're talking about also everyone feels like they're involved. Everyone understands the role that they play in customer success, right? Every role across the organization understands then. If this is something that teams do together collectively across the org and it's supported by the executives, everyone understands the role that they play in driving customer success. This is what customer success is supposed to be. It's entire organization centered around the value that is being delivered to the customer. And when you look at it this way, and when you do these kinds of exercises, you can really start to see with a lot of clarity the challenges that are holding organizations back. And then you get the buy-in and the ability to prioritize the right things across the entire organization.
True alignment. Yeah. Makes a ton
of sense. So, and again, true alignment. It sounds so beautiful and it sounds like this so far, very complex thing, but actually it's so simple. I've been in organizations, by the way, like when I was at Shopify, when the pandemic happened in March of 2020, we actually fully dismantled our hierarchical structure in favor of a squad-based structure so that we could be super flexible and nimble, identify the main challenges that were happening with the massive influx of net new customers that we were bringing on board, and react insanely fast, because there wasn't any more of this like, oh, I'm in my, I have this job and don't try taking my job. This is my job. It was like, we're a team. We have cross-functional stakeholders across a variety of different functions and skills and capabilities working together to solve this problem. Like, we stood up a 3 times a week instructor-led webinar program in 6 weeks end to end, like with Damon John and like some of the biggest names in commerce. 6 weeks it took us from start to finish. But that's the power of like removing friction internally, operating in a slightly different way than the traditional, hierarchical streams that we've been operating under for years and years and years. Like, sometimes that's not always conducive to getting stuff done and moving fast and solving the real problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a perfect example of that. Any other organizations that come to mind? It could be, any scale, who really nail this in terms of like proximity to end user, anticipation of need. Anything else that comes to mind? Obviously, Shopify is a fantastic example of this, but anything else?
I mean, Shopify's just, look, I'm so biased when it comes to this, because not only was my experience, like, they really have it figured out, Sean, they do, because not only was my experience as an employee so stellar because of all the reasons that I've already talked about in this conversation, right? Like thinking differently about problems, cross-functional alignment. We had weekly town halls. I don't know if they still do them, but like weekly conversations with the executive team where they would talk to us about the most pressing challenges and, what was going on in their minds. And so you felt like you were really part of something and part of the mission. And then also that, of course, led to an obsession with customer experience, to the point where everyone across the board, everyone inside that company wanted to do right by the merchants and grow the merchants and do whatever they could to support them and provide value. So I learned that very early on in my career. The values that they instilled in me are so strong, and I've carried those forward in so much of what I do now and how I coach startups and organizations in their own mindset shifts. Like, if you are able to instill that mission and that care for customers and the proximity to customers, have conversations with customers. And by the way, this can be done in any role. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, what your job is within your organization. Get on a call with a customer. Like, make it your duty to hop on a customer call once every couple weeks, just to find out how they're using the product. What are some of the challenges that they're facing? How are they using their product in their day-to-day? What does their day-to-day look like? What is their job? Like, just again, it's all about developing that empathy, but it starts with the executive team. It starts with culture. It starts with instilling a sense of alignment to mission first and foremost. And so I'm a bit biased there with my experience at Shopify for sure.
I mean, it's I can imagine it's hard not to be. I feel like we should end it, if you're comfortable sharing a little bit of that story around the partner workflow of sort of like the in-app experience or the user experience of being able to sort of proactively suggest different apps and plugins and the next action of some of that stuff that a user would like. I think this is like one of the best examples I've ever seen of taking like what's an initiative, like we want to be partner driven, like that doesn't mean anything, right? But it's like, no, we know that we can't build it all. So we know there's great people doing amazing things in our ecosystem, but it's super easy for there to be an ecosystem and then customers, and then they don't really get to work together. And it's like one of the best examples I've heard of like this unlock of an initiative aligned and then executed with like real understanding of the customer.
Yeah. I'll speak to the example from Shopify for sure, but keep in mind too that this requires a level of sophistication around data architecture, right? That most organizations would struggle with just because of size and scale. And so what I'll do is talk a little bit about how we did that and what were some of the things that I saw in action in my time at Shopify. Also keep in mind, this was like a few years ago now, so certainly things have changed. But I'll also try to ground it in some smaller things that can be done within smaller organizations that might be thinking about how to better serve their customers and better integrate their partner ecosystem into the value that's being provided to customers. So okay, where do I start? One of the things that I think Shopify did exceptionally well and still does exceptionally well to this day is being able to leverage product telemetry data, usage data on how customers are using the platform, and then uncovering blocks in their ability to reach a certain milestone. So going back to customer journey mapping that I already talked about, right? If you have a baseline customer journey map and you kind of understand the general milestones that you're trying to work towards, typically there's like an activation milestone, especially if you're a product-led growth organization, you'll have like an activation milestone that consists of them taking a certain action that you know with certainty is probably going to lead to a conversion. And so the first X amount of days are trying to get the person to do that thing. And then after that, it's all about conversion. And then post-conversion, what are all of the different milestones that you want your customers to achieve within a certain amount of time? And also understanding, what does it take to do that? It's not just about the product. It's like, what does my CSM need to give me? What do we need to give in terms of customer education and resources? What experiences do we want to surface up? What partners can fit in to solve specific gaps that we know are common at this particular phase of the customer journey? So having that baseline, mapping out the milestones, understand the behaviors that you're trying to drive, and then collecting data across that journey so that you can optimize on the fly. And again, that's the part that's hard and requires like a level of sophistication around your data architecture and your data warehouse mapping and all of this stuff that is quite complex. But when you can do that, even on a small scale, if you can identify that 9 times out of 10, your customers are coming on board and you expect them to take a certain action within 14 days, but 9 times out of 10, they're not taking that action. Well, what's getting in their way? And let's design experiments that are going to remove friction such that they take that action a higher percentage of the time. And that's one thing that you can just run on a loop and continue to optimize. And you can do that across the entire customer journey. And then the real value add is like when you have systems where you've documented all of the problems that your partner ecosystem are serving. So you have service-based businesses, you have apps, you have all of this stuff that is built on top of your base platform, product, whatever it is. If you know and you've documented and you have strong knowledge management systems to understand value props, benefits, specific pains that all of those other tools and services help solve, then you can use the data that's at your fingertips to surface up an alternate solution to the problem. And it's just another solution in the toolkit. When we talked about solution trees, and deciding on different solutions. One of the solutions could be introducing a partner into the mix. It doesn't always have to be something that you solve for. It can be a partner solution that you offer up because you're confident that they meet the exact need of that exact customer at that moment in time. And so it just makes sense for you to surface up that information at that moment. So that's kind of how I think about it, like at a large scale. And if you want to try to do this in a smaller organization, it comes down to knowledge management systems. It comes down to like documentation, making sure that you're working with your partners to, even if it's a one pager, right? Like have a collection of one pagers on each of your partners and understand what they do, who they serve, the problems that they solve, and use that to identify problems that your customers are having and then be able to offer up a solution that isn't yours, because then everyone wins. Everyone, the entire ecosystem wins when you think about it that way.
Beautiful. I love that. Well, Sam, that's a beautiful way to end. I think that puts a nice bow on everything that we've covered here today. So thank you for taking some time to really go in depth with us.
My pleasure.
And share all of these things. Where can folks find you? Where would you like to, if they want to learn more and connect with you?
For sure. Yeah. So LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me. I'm always open to conversations with everyone, happy to hop on calls and sort of like just chat through some of this stuff, because evidently, I'm sure it's obvious, I'm very passionate about all of this. My consultancy is AlignedCX.com. And then if you're interested in learning more about people experience as a product, if you are in, HR, people operations, learning and development, any role that is serving internal employees, and you're interested in learning more about our group coaching program or our workshops, you can visit pxasaproduct.com.
Amazing. We'll link to all that so folks can check that out. Lots of good resources. You put great free content out there for the world too. So we'll make sure to point people there.
Awesome.
Overall, Sam, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some wisdom today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Adoption Curve. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and want more content like this, I highly recommend subscribing to our newsletter, where we break down insights, frameworks, and templates from our guests on each show. To access, go to iorad.com/newsletter. Also, make sure you subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. If you could, we'd also love it if you could leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed and got value out of today's conversation. The Adoption Curve is produced by iORAD, the tool that helps thousands of companies make interactive tutorials in seconds. They're shareable in all the tools you use every day. We'll see you on the next episode.